Hi, I'm Gervase Bushe, one of the co-founders of the Bushe-Marshak Institute for Dialogic OD, and one of the editors of the BMI Series in Dialogic OD. And I'm here with Bennett Bratt, who's written The Team Discovered, Dialogic Team Coaching. Hi, Ben.
Hey, Gervase. So nice to be with you.
So why don't we start by you telling us a bit about yourself. I think you got exposed to OD early in your career.
That's correct. In the mid 1990s, I had finished one master's degree in political science and one in counseling, and found myself with the opportunity to learn about OD. I had a wonderful mentor when I worked at the state of Michigan, and we learned all sorts of things about Peter Senge and the fifth discipline, but also a lot. We participated in a thing called the School for Managing, which was put on by Peter Block and Kathy Dannemiller, Meg Wheatley, and a number of folks. And I was exposed to this world of OD in Michigan, where it all came together for me from a political science perspective, looking at the broad forces at work in organizations, and the counseling perspective, looking at the interpersonal, and the teams also. And made a move to Ford about 1997 and had the privilege of starting up a team effectiveness coaching group there that supported executives in the Ford product development department. So I can't believe 25 years have gone by since that all happened, and 5 years ago, getting a chance to meet you and learning about Dialogic, and it's been a magnificent 25 years in OD, yeah.
And you've worked for some really big companies since then, right? Ford, Volkswagen, most recently head of HR at T-Mobile, or some part of the HR group.
That's correct. Yeah, I was VP of HR for what we call talent and organization capability. So all of recruiting, workforce strategy and insights, leadership development, management development, all of those topics.
And now you're out with your own Signal, consulting, doing team coaching all over the place. So let's talk about your book. So why this somewhat unusual title, The Team Discovered? Like, who's discovering the team, or even who is the team?
Yeah. The question, the title actually brings me to this really odd point that you bring up, which is like, the team discovered. Like, what did the team discover, or is this a team that has been discovered? And actually, I mean it both ways. The word discovery is important because it moves me away from a sense of diagnosis and more into a broad exploration, like a visceral, like horizons we don't quite yet understand, but we're willing to take the risk to go explore them. And that sense of yearning for uncovering things. That's the sense of discovered. And the team, interestingly, both in the book and in my practice, the team is the client team, but it's also the OD practitioners. They represent a second team, and combined, they represent a third team. Like, we can't separate out very well the client team from the practitioner team, and together, we are on a collective sense of discovery, and a discovery of what? Of meaning, of complexity, of the path to greater effectiveness. And that happens more for me through discovery than through a sense of rigorous diagnosis.
And that really aligns well with one of our points about the dialogic mindset, is a sense of the consultant as being a part of, as opposed to being apart from. And I know you have a very active team coaching practice, and that you use a model of 16 elements of team. But what I was most excited about with the work that you do is how you use survey data, which is really, I think, quite different from anything I've ever learned. And in your book, you really emphasize that comparative data is a key difference between a diagnostic and a dialogic approach. And could you explain a bit about what you mean by comparative data and how it's normally used in OD, and how what you do is different from that?
Yeah, over time, I've come to embrace the sense that while there's nothing wrong, and in fact, there's a lot valuable with studying large numbers of teams, finding patterns across teams and organizations, that it actually sets us up for a temptation to take macro sets of data about teams and infer them upon the individual team. And in that sense, we actually create a logical fallacy. We're creating the ecological fallacy when we apply large realizations about groups of teams to an individual team. And and beyond that, there's a sense of
So
comparison.
just for
Yeah.
people who don't know what that is, what is the ecological fallacy?
Yeah, it's that. It's when one would say like, wow, if we studied 10,000 fifth graders, that when we took the insights from studying 10,000 fifth graders or 10,000 teams or anything, that when you apply it down to an individual instance, that is in and of itself a fallacy. We actually can't say that because an average number of things being observed act a certain way, we can't with any confidence say that an individual is therefore dictated to act that way or is going to act that way. It's not, it's insightful, but it's not predictive. And so rather than saying that there are norms about teams, that all teams go through 5 phases and all teams must go through these developmental phases, it works better for me over time just to say, what is this one unique team? And by not comparing them, I help the team focus on themselves and to find their own narrative in a very complex setting. When we compare, comparison is kind of the thief of joy. A team, when finally understood and talking about itself and its story and its experience and its effectiveness, doesn't really need to have their mind taken outside the room to either idealized teams or averages of teams. And so I think it's an honoring of that team, the honoring of the power of that small social ecosystem to say, I'm actually not all that interested in how you compare to a norm. I'm really interested in how you find meaning in what your own experience is.
All right. And so I was really struck by how you feed back survey data, not as averages or not as comparisons against something or the other, but actually as a kind of a, here's all the different ways people responded to this question, and you get to see the variety of opinions and perspectives and what I call, allowing that differentiated sets of voices in the room. And so what you're really doing is helping the team develop its own story of itself without sort of the distraction of these models. Or although I suppose as a team coach, it's useful to have these models as a lens for seeing what's taking place and being able maybe to think about what needs to happen next. But it's not necessarily that useful to do that, to give it to the team, because they've got to create their own story.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I now think of data more as like, well, let me say, I think people enjoy data. And that data might be their averaged scores within a team of how much trust exists. Or it might be a story one could tell about how trust was compromised. Regardless, it's data. And I think I want data. People want data. It's the mindset we use when we apply that data. And so I think of it as like a sheep in wolf's clothing, to invert the normal saying. The data that we're giving them is not in any way diagnostic. It's just a springboard for dialogue. And so it looks like that old-fashioned data, but it's more like, hey, what do you make of that? We tell the team, you be the social scientist. What do you see in the data? What patterns do you see? And therefore, they own their conversation. They own their own self-assessment. I don't need to assess them. What I think of them is barely relevant.
It just takes me back to the early roots of OD, and I think that spirit of inquiry, when, before we had Lost on the Moon exercises and 9-9 grids, and really the OD practitioner is there to engage the client system really in an active self-study and without any sorts of boundaries around what we might expect to find. Well, you argue that every team is a unique entity, and you allude to a puzzle box metaphor for coaching teams. So besides avoiding comparison, what do you think the impact of this mindset of looking at a team as a puzzle box has on the craft of team building and team coaching?
Yeah, for me, I love puzzles. I'm a Sunday crossword kind of guy. And for me, it becomes more powerful for me and the team together to think about, like, what's the puzzle to solve rather than the problem to be fixed. And I think sometimes the sense of diagnosis is like there's a problem and we can assess it and find a remedy. For me, the language choice is important. And so the craft of team coaching becomes like, this is a fascinating puzzle. And it's almost like taking out a jigsaw puzzle box. But there isn't really a picture on the front cover. It's like we open it up and it's like there are just pieces that begin to show themselves to be patterned. and a lot of trial and experimentation to find the way the pieces start to fit together. But because the team is a complex adaptive system, not a mechanistic one, it means that every time we come back to the team, something will have shifted. Their context, the composition of the team, the diversity of the team, be it as it may, we might come back and open that puzzle box again and find out that the puzzle shifted slightly. So the orientation we bring as craftspeople, as people who want to be with the team and help them find their path to development, their critical path to greater effectiveness, means that every time we open that box, we have to be open and in fact can wonder at the marvel of things that have shifted, and actually be really cool that they don't fit in a predictive model per se. And so it's this continual path of curiosity and acceptance that brings us to that place.
What I really am impressed with what you're doing is, on the one hand, you're like really staying open to inquiry into what shows up and whatever. On the other hand, in your book, you really have a lot of attention to how little time teams have, the amount of attention poverty most people now experience, the general sort of resistance to any of this sort of self-study that's required. And how do you square that? Stay open to the mystery, and at the same time with this need to actually get something done.
Yeah, I like to make a commitment to myself and then actually make it to the team that we will never work on anything that is not absolutely intriguing to them. And so as much as I have a process in mind and a model and methodology to do the work, I actually don't think of this as like, now I'm going to take you through this, this, and this. Rather, if we find that conversation, if we find that question, that if we could ask it, it would unlock many things for us, that as a practitioner, I want to adjust on the fly and bring them a highly crafted, highly relevant thing that will just make the most of the 30 minutes, and maybe something we've never done before, maybe something totally emergent in the moment. That's the craft part of it. And I ask them to be duty bound to ever tell me if something doesn't seem relevant, if we're not working on that generative question or that hypothesis they're holding that will unlock their development. And so when they take that approach, then we're in conversation about what's relevant, not about the bag of tricks or my toolbox I have to offer them. That's
Right.
relevant, but it's
Whatever model you're carrying around. Yeah. Well, Bob and I are just tickled pink to be publishing this book. It has had an impact on me. I know the next teamwork I do is going to be different as a result of it. And I hope you're encouraged to go out and buy a copy of the Team Discovered Dialogic Team Coaching. Thanks for talking to me.
Thanks, Gervase.